8:36 back on the Big Boy Radio Show. You're listening to Florida Sports Talk, powered by NBC Sports. You can listen live online all the time. FloridaSportsTalk.fm. Time now to turn our attention to the University of Miami, where the Hurricanes get a big win inside the Coastal. That win over the Duke Blue Devils, and we'll talk about that with our good friend Danny Money of CanesInSight.com. Danny, good morning. How are you, my friend?
Doing great. How you guys doing?
Doing well. It's nice to – thank God, Danny, we get to do this show. Remember we had said a week prior, that if Duke knocked off Miami, we weren't going to do the show anymore. So it's nice to get back to the winning ways. Miami beats Duke. But I'll be 100% honest with you. Maybe it's just the pessimistic feel that I have now with the program. I'm unwilling to go, all right, moving forward now. Good days ahead. It wasn't like a complete victory. Now, the defense played well, and the offense at times played really well. Duke Johnson did his thing. Brad Kaya did his thing, but they were just unable to put Duke away. I'm still concerned long-term about the program. Should I at least temper my despair at least for 1 week and just enjoy the victory? Is that what you're telling fans this week?
It's an ongoing test. I mean, they're smack in the middle of ACC Coastal competition, and if there's one thing that we've seen with Miami over the past really 10 years is they can play really well in an important game and then lay an egg in the next game or the following game. So that's really going to be the test for Miami is can they be consistent through this ACC Coastal schedule? Obviously, Georgia Tech next week, Virginia Tech on the horizon. There's a lot of challenges that await, and the test for Miami is going to be consistency because we've seen them play well like they played against Duke in the past, and they just haven't been able to follow that up. So it's going to be interesting to watch.
Are you surprised how well the defense held up against Duke this year as opposed to last year when they really couldn't stop Duke at all?
Yes and no. I'm impressed by the way the defense played. I like how Coach D'Onofrio adjusted. In the post-game pressers, Coach Golden and Coach D'Onofrio said that they didn't really change anything on the defense. I don't believe that. I think that's simply just trying to, distract from the changes they did make and take some of the heat off of themselves. If you look at the way the safeties played on third and short, played a lot closer to the line, obviously played the run a lot with a lot more respect than we saw against Nebraska. And you saw the quarterbacks getting in the wide receivers' faces, pressing. So the defense certainly looked different. They performed well. They did execute better. They tackled better. I also wasn't very impressed with Duke, to be honest with you. The quarterback was inaccurate. Skill position players never really got going. We know that Jamison Crowder is a very talented wide receiver. Never really got loose against Miami. And in general, they didn't look like a upper echelon team. Now, it's still a good win for Miami, but there's going to be stiffer tests ahead.
Now, one of the positions that Miami fans are looking at and asking questions about is that backup running back's position there, as Duke Johnson, again, picks up another naggy injury, an ankle sprain. The backup running back position is a position of question as Gus Edwards just doesn't seem to be able to get going in a football game. Joseph Yearby supposedly is going to get some more carries. How about Trayon Gray? Should we see him in the rotation a little bit more, or is the three-man rotation going to, again, continue to include Gus Edwards?
Trayon Gray is in a similar situation to Mike Weish. Obviously, Mike Weish plays a much different position at the nose tackle, but both guys came in late and really could have used spring. They're both raw in their technique. They're still learning the position. They're still getting their conditioning right, and they're still learning the playbook. So that's what's keeping both of those guys off the field. If Trayon Gray would have gotten here in spring like Joseph Yearby, I think he'd be much further ahead than he is now. But you're talking about a guy who played quarterback his whole career or wide receiver at Carroll City, now playing running back. So he's struggling with the basics like just taking the handoff. He's getting better. He's getting more comfortable. But again, to throw him out there in a coastal game at a big time in the game, I think it's too much of a risk for the coaches right now. And after seeing what I saw in camp, I understand where they're coming from. He is an explosive player, very talented, and has a bright future. But for now, I think it's going to be Joseph Yearby and Gus Edwards backing up Duke Johnson, with the real difference being Yearby taking more of that load.
Miami Saturday will be without their two top right tackles. How much of a hit is that, and what's the plan to kind of shuffle things around the offensive line this week?
It's a major hit, and it's really unfortunate because Taylor Gadbois, who's a starting right tackle, is really, really starting to play well. He's a guy who didn't start coming into this year, came in, really, although he was an older player, extremely inexperienced. So he was starting to get it, and he was really starting to play well, particularly as a drive blocker. So it's really frustrating to see him go down with an injury. At right tackle, they should be steady with John Feliciano. He started at right tackle as a freshman back in Coach Golden's first year and did extremely well. So I think Feliciano is going to hold down the right tackle spot. The issue is you create a hole at left guard where Feliciano was an all-conference type player. Nick Linder, another true freshman, looks like he might fill that void. Linder's brother, Brandon Linder, who's now starting for the Jacksonville Jaguars, a third-round pick last year. Not as big as his brother, probably not as talented in terms of like an NFL prospect, but technically sound, tough, comes from St. Thomas Aquinas. He'll mentally be ahead of the curve for a true freshman, but physically, he doesn't look like what you'd expect from an ACC lineman at this stage of his career. So that's going to be a challenge, is holding up inside against Georgia Tech's interior pass rushers.
Yeah, one of the other things when you play a Georgia Tech team, the thing you got to focus on most is the defense, because Georgia Tech runs the option offense and responsibilities and guys on the defensive line that can make plays. Is Miami in a situation? Is Miami prepared to knock off Georgia Tech? I remember they beat Georgia Tech, have beaten Georgia Tech, a little bit over the last couple of years here. But are they in a position on defense to slow down that offense?
I think so. Miami's had a tremendous amount of success against Georgia Tech really the last 5 years. So I don't think this is something that is really going to scare Miami or that they're not prepared for, they haven't dealt with before. Now, every game is different. They're going to have to execute. They're going to have to tackle better than they did against Nebraska. But personnel-wise, you have a lot of guys that have seen this option. It's an experienced defense, if not a dominant defense. It is experience, so they've dealt with it before. They succeeded against it before. Guys like Denzel Perryman seem to put their yearly highlight reels up against Georgia Tech just because they play with so much aggression and they play so confidently. So I expect Miami to do well. Guys like Mantan Mufentris, who maybe don't get to shine throughout the season, might shine on Saturday just because they fit the plan of attack against this offense. So I do expect Miami to perform well on defense, but they certainly need to do so, because if they don't, it's going to keep that explosive offense of Miami off the field.
True freshman Braxton Berrios averaging 10 yards per reception. How impressed have you been with him so far, and will we see him in a more involved role moving forward on offense?
Braxton Berrios, I'm a huge fan of Braxton Berrios. I think you might have interviewed him during the recruiting process. I thought I saw an interview that you might have done with him.
Yeah, I did.
But,
he's a great kid.
Yeah, he's a great kid, great player. I actually, kind of name dropping here, I actually saw a highlight reel of Braxton just wasting time on the internet one night, and I sent it to one of my buddies who was working at the time with the University of Miami, and that's kind of how he got on the radar with UM. He's a huge UM fan, grew up originally in Miami and then moved to North Carolina. Was convinced to come down to the summer camp, dominated all these Dade County defensive backs, then went on to the opening up in Oregon, showed out there, went to the Under Armour All-America game, tore his ACL, and then caught a touchdown on his torn ACL, and he's already back and performing at this level. Is really kind of like a medical miracle for a guy who relies so much on his quickness to come back that quickly from an ACL. But he's developed a quick chemistry with Brad Kaya. They had that, they kind of had that sense where on third down or on these important downs or fourth down, and like, for example, in the Louisville game, they know where each other's heads are at, and it's really nice to see. And the guy has more speed than he gets credit for. I mean, people say, they compare him to basically every white slot receiver that's ever played, but he's really, really, really athletic, and he can make plays down the field as well, as you saw against Arkansas State. So he's a guy that's got a lot of talent. It really has Canes fans excited.
Danny Money, CanesInSight.com, our guest here on the Big Boy Radio Show talking Miami Hurricane football. Danny, I want to ask you about Stacy Coley again. Stacy Coley, a big-time wide receiver coming out of high school, had a great freshman year. We talked about the sophomore slump. Deep ball to him early in that game last week against Duke that goes right through his fingers. Obviously, confidence and momentum may be a bit of an issue for him. He's battling a shoulder injury as well. I mean, is he a guy that you think they should maybe sit for another game to maybe get fully healthy, or they need to throw him more balls to get him going? What would be the remedy for what's ailing Stacy Coley at this moment?
I would just keep throwing to him. You saw last year against FAU, He had the 3 drops in the first game after having such an exceptional camp, and everybody was talking about him. And he didn't go into a hole. He kept playing, and then he started making plays and became one of the most dynamic all-around freshmen in the country. So I would just keep going to him. You know, some people on the message boards in the Canes community are talking about that they're questioning his ability to run routes, his ability to catch the football. I mean, I've seen him make amazing catches both in camp and in games and in high school. He's extremely quick out of his breaks. So the route running, although it's not where it would be at the end of his college career, he still has a lot of talent for getting open and separating. I'm not worried about Stacey Coley. We saw Amari Cooper and Sammy Watkins both go through serious sophomore slumps. They obviously bounced back. Coley maybe wasn't as productive as they were as receivers as a freshman, but he was just as productive overall when you look at the running and the kick returning. So I put him in that class of player. You know, we've seen a lot of receivers come through Miami. He is really one of the special ones, from my opinion, watching him since high school. So I believe he will bounce back, and he's a mentally tough kid. He just needs to keep playing.
Danny, one of the guys that to me stood out as I was watching the game against Duke on the defensive side of the ball was Jermaine Grace. Was that because he was getting, maybe some more opportunity out there on the football field, or was that just a game that, because of what Duke was doing offensively, allowed him to maybe make more plays, be around the ball a little bit more? And if it was the first thing I said, are we going to see more of Jermaine Grace on the field, because he seemed to be flying around out there, to use a Randy Shannon bit of terminology? He was flying around out there and it looked like he was making plays.
I'm a huge Jermaine Grace fan. I think he is a better player than Raphael Kirby. Has less experience, but I think he's a better overall player. I'd like to see more of him going forward. I think he's capable of putting in performances like you saw on Saturday. Georgia Tech's going to be interesting to watch. Just from his physical skill set, I'd expect him to play a lot against Georgia Tech. Coach Golden likes to employ smaller, quicker linebackers than he usually does against Georgia Tech and that option. You've seen Nantambu Fentress, who I mentioned earlier, Tyrone Cornelius last year. They get their most snaps at linebacker against Georgia Tech just because Coach Golden likes that matchup. Jermaine Grace cut from the same cloth, small, quick, athletic, smart. I would like to see him get a lot of snaps against Georgia Tech because I think he can make a lot of impactful plays.
Danny Money, CanesInSight.com, our guest here, talking Miami Hurricane football. How about a couple of other guys that you've seen through the first few games of the season making strides, taking steps forward, whether it's a Jamal Crawford or Artie Burns? Who are a couple of guys that you saw play last year as freshmen that you say, you know what, they're getting some experience underneath their belt, and by the time the end of the season comes along, these are guys that are going to be big-time playmakers and guys, big-time contributors for this football team?
In terms of sophomores, Corn Elder is a name that jumps out. He's a guy that I've been a fan of for a long, long time. I saw his first practice last year when he first got here from Tennessee and put the pads on. He got 2 interceptions in his first practice. And this is a guy who didn't play cornerback in high school, was one of the most prolific running backs in the country up in Tennessee, and also played safety on defense. So his transition to corner was a natural. He's extremely quick, very fluid, very coordinated, great feet, and he's tough. And he's shown some very good open field tackling ability. The one weakness you'd say with Corn Elder is just his body. He's very skinny at this point. You'd like him to put on more weight, kind of like with Stacey Coley, that you really like to see them make strides in the weight room over the next 2 years. But if he does, his future is sky high. So I think Corn Elder's the guy that really stands out in terms of a sophomore this year who got his feet wet last year and now is really heading towards that breakout.
Danny, final question for you. When you look at Brad Kaya, what he's done, this is his football team now. Ryan Williams, I don't know if he's 100% healthy or whatnot, but Ryan Williams and this football team resigned to the fact that this is now Brad Kaya's football team, and he's maybe squarely in the position of being the backup quarterback, right?
I think so. I mean, Brad Kaya is doing some stuff that's really unheard of for a true freshman. And the sad thing is Ryan Williams played so well in spring, and even in camp when I saw him, he was making throws. Obviously, he was hindered by his knee, but he's really come a long way as a passer. He's always had that accuracy, but now he's able to make deeper throws down the field just because he anticipates so well. And he definitely could be starting and producing for somebody at Division I level and doing a really good job. So it's kind of, as happy as you are to see Brad Kaya almost take the ACC by storm as a true freshman, it's really disappointing to see Ryan Williams not have his opportunity to be the starting quarterback in Miami.
Danny Money, CanesInsight.com, the best in the business, talking Miami Hurricane football. He does it with us each and every Thursday here on the Big Boy Radio Show. As always, Danny, man, appreciate your time and information. Enjoy the game on Saturday, and we will talk to you next week, my friend.
See you guys then. Take care.
Appreciate it. Danny Money, CanesInSight.com. Check out the websites where I go for all my hurricane news and information. Coming up next, we'll wrap up this edition of the Big Boy Radio Show right here on Florida Sports Talk.